The Edmonton Oilers had an offseason of turmoil, decisions, and cost cutting. The Troy Stecher experiment seems to be working a lot better than anyone could have forecasted.
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Tuesday edition of Locked On Oilers. I am your host, Nick Zararis. I want to thank everyone who's making Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. You can enjoy the NFL season with a big return. New customers can place a $5 bet and get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. So we're going to analyze Stetcher's arc to this point, why he hasn't necessarily gotten the most opportunities, even though he's clearly shown an ability to be a functional NHL caliber defenseman. We're going to tackle what his underlying numbers look like this season. And then our final segment, it's going to hit on what realistic expectations are going forward. And frankly, a bigger discussion about analyzing the defensive position in today's NHL. So at the outset, as the main point here, I really do know that Moneyball has occupied an outsized point of influence or point of conversation in discussing sports, but the finer points of the movie are its weak point, and the book for that matter. It's where it kind of falls apart if you know what happened that season for the Oakland A's, that there are important players who aren't mentioned in the movie, who are only briefly referenced aside in the book. But the core principles and ideas of that movie, the idea that players, for whatever their perceived deficiency are undervalued, they're underappreciated, and there is always, and there always will be, a market of players who have a deficiency. They might be old, they might be small, they might be European, they might be Russian, and that gives teams pause. They have this outsized perception, not outsized, that's not the right word. They have this perception of European or Russian players being difficult or being divas or being soft. And some teams are a lot more reticent to do that. And of course, all of that is utter nonsense. Anybody who is telling you, nah, you can't sign that guy, he's from blank, is an idiot. Anybody who's telling you, he's too small, they are not being realistic, because the game is changing. And this is an area where inefficiencies present opportunities. And the Oilers had a lot of decisions to make over the summer as far as reconstructing, retooling their roster around their big names this past offseason. They had to make calculated decisions. And sure, did they go a little crazy in some of the free agent spending, going after Arvidsson and Skinner, giving Perry a raise, giving Janmark a raise? Did they go a little nuts? Yeah, they did. It bit them in the butt. They got offer sheeted, first successful offer sheet in a couple of years, double offer sheet, first time that's ever happened. And at a certain point, you have to ask yourself this question. Why is Troy Stecher where he's at in his NHL career? And there are levels, there are degrees to that. And it starts out with the most simple and the most straightforward. Well, where was he drafted? Well, Troy Stecher was undrafted. That's point number one. So let's break this down as nebulous and detailed as we possibly can. Troy Stecher, undrafted, 5'10", so undersized, not somebody perceived to be good at defense, and profiles as a puck-moving defenseman. Now, most teams have a specific archetype in mind for their power play one guy, their main driver of their first power play. You know, it looks like Evan Bouchard, looks like Cale Makar, Adam Fox, Charlie McAvoy, Quinn Hughes. There is a perceived archetype for that role. And for the most part, those are highly touted, promising players that organizations stick a lot of resources in their development. You know, typically those guys are drafted relatively high, or they are traded for in the case of Adam Fox. And those assets are a symbolization of how much an organization values it. So for someone like Stetcher, who's undrafted, the path to running a first power play, which is where his skill set would be most useful, it's not the most obvious because a team isn't going to want to give someone like Troy Stecher, who doesn't have that track record, who doesn't have that pedigree, the keys to a first power play. And I'm not saying at any point in his NHL career, whether it's Vancouver, Arizona, Detroit, LA, Calgary, should he have been running their first power play over another guy, but his skill set, the puck mover, the offensively inclined, that skill set has a very perceived ceiling amongst NHL decision makers. The people in charge don't want undersized defensemen. They don't want more than one of those power plays type guys because they feel that the perceived defensive deficiency is too much to overcome. And I'm not here to tell you that Troy Stecher is great defensively. He's not. He's mobile and he can move the puck. Those are important components of playing decent defense. You know, the most important, I would argue, is positioning. I think positioning is the most important trait when it comes to playing defense in today's league, because you're not going to be able to keep up with everybody out there, even if you're a good skater like Stetcher is, but you need to be able to cut guys off, to play angles, to use the space on the ice to your advantage. And the next point, where does he end up? Well, he ends up in Vancouver to start his NHL career, as Vancouver is in the midst of a truly terrible run of hockey. You know, you think about the Canucks post 2016, 2017, where it really kind of unravels. You know, they have the one nice year in the bubble where they go to the second round of the playoffs. They have a nice playoff performance there, but it is not the most hospitable environment for success for a young player. You know, the Canucks, up until last year, where Rick Tocchet was able to kind of sink his teeth into that group, weren't exactly a defensive powerhouse. That group was not well known for its defense, even if it had talented players like Quinn Hughes, like Chris Tanev. You know, those guys are good at defense, and the Canucks as a team unbelievably struggled defensively. Next, on top of that, so you've got an undrafted player with a skill set that teams aren't going to prioritize if you're not one of their guys on a bad team, especially a bad defensive team, who doesn't really have plush traits. You know, I think he's an above average skater. I think he's an above average passer of the puck. But beyond that, there's nothing that jumps off the screen. There's no incredible play, no great tape, or anything that's really going to tell you how good this guy actually is without watching it on a nightly basis, because he's not a flashy player. He is very steady. Occasionally you take a mistake. You know, the one against St. Louis on Saturday night wasn't great. Got the game within a goal, but he atoned. He scored a goal. So all of that said, the last part of this is that he hasn't stayed healthy the last handful of seasons. You know, not a ton of games, 54 games last year, 61 the year before that. He hasn't played a full season effectively since 21-22. And coming into this year, I figured he would be the sixth defenseman. And instead, I know that the minutes are kind of funky on this team right now, where Stetcher is only playing like 1480 a game, but at the same time, some of the other defensemen are playing a little bit less. You know, like Emerson is creeping over 15 minutes a game now. Nurse is over 20 minutes a game. Ekholm and Bouchard are both over 20 minutes a game. And I'm not saying that Stetcher is doing an incredible job, but he's doing a replacement level or better job. And right now, that's kind of all the Oilers need in the minute allocation that he is getting this season. You know, they don't need him to be incredible. You know, in an ideal world, the Oilers are going to trade for another defenseman in their top four, and then we can have an honest conversation. Would you prefer Emerson or Stetcher? Why or why not? And then you have the luxury of Troy Stecher being your seventh defenseman as opposed to Travis Dermott. You know, you deepen your lineup, elongate your lineup, have less of a drop-off from line to line, pair to pair. We're going to take our first break of today's show. We're going to dive into the underlying numbers coming up next. Today's episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. If you love sports, you're going to love PrizePicks, the best place to turn your sports knowledge into real money. Whether it's hockey, football, or any of your favorite sports, PrizePicks makes it easy to get in on the action. You need to get started today because you can win up to 200 times your money on PrizePicks. Get $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. No need to win. The $50 is guaranteed. PrizePicks also offers fun weekly promotions like Taco Tuesday, where select player projections discounted up to 25%. This week on PrizePicks, you could do something like Jack Hughes more than 4 shots on goal in a Devils game, or Artemi Panarin more than 1 assist in a Ranger game. It's so simple to take my picks and have fun with my friends, potentially cashing out fast. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNHL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's right, $50 instantly. PrizePicks, run your game. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out here on this Tuesday edition of Locked On Oilers, where we are diving all into Troy Stecher's first 20-some-odd games of the 2024-2025 season. And I would not bank on Troy Stecher continuing to be functional to this degree. This is some of the better hockey he's played in his career. And frankly, this is the first time Troy Stecher is getting prolonged ice time. And I mean that in terms of games played, like just getting on the ice. This is the first time he's ever seriously been on a really good team. You know, he's made the playoffs 2 times prior to this season. He's got 21 career NHL playoff games. He doesn't have a whole lot of a track record, and he's played 17 games on the Canucks team that we mentioned in the bubble, and then he played 4 games of the 7 games against the Kings in the first round of 2021-2022. 6 games, excuse me. This is not somebody who's having some like incredible late career renaissance. The Oilers are being extremely tactile in their usage of their defensemen this season. You know, Ekholm and Bouchard are not going to be able to play 23 minutes a night all regular season and then have their playoff minutes bumped up 24, 25, 26 minutes a night. That's just simply unsustainable. Even as good as they are, eventually you're going to have start having a negative return on that increase in ice time. There is an inflection point where after a while, there's only so much you can do to extract more. At a certain point, guys do hit a physical wall, and you're going to need to dial back their minutes. That's why it's so important. The Oilers added defensemen at the trade deadline to bolster this lineup so that Ekholm and Bouchard can play a little bit less, so Nurse can play a little bit less, so Kulak, so Emberson, so everybody plays a little bit less, because in theory, if you maximize guys' efficiency in their ice time, you should get better results. You know, the idea of deepening your lineup and having guys like Stetcher, who've been playing with Nurse in spurts, Kulak with Nurse in spurts, playing them a little bit less, that's going to help you out a lot the longer you go, because the longer your grind goes, and you know, we always talk about the 10-month journey, the longer your grind goes, the harder it is to maintain that high level. And look, there is an inherent connection there between reaching a higher level and going further, but eventually guys do hit a physical wall. And when you look at Stetcher's underlying numbers this season, they're nothing remarkable. There's nothing on here that's jumping off the screen as far as, oh my goodness, he's having an incredible year. You know, the goal splits aren't perfect. He's been on the ice for 9 goals for 12 goals against. The 42% goal split's not the best. He's got a 48% scoring chance share, meaning that the Oilers concede 52% of the scoring chances when he's out there. The reason I am inclined to be a little more optimistic about his trajectory is when you go towards the expected goals and the high danger chances. So when you account for the quality of the offense against, that's where I can kind of be like, oh, okay, there's a little more meat on the bone here, if you will. You know, for someone like Stetcher, who doesn't play a ton at 5-on-5, he has 327 minutes across 23 games. He doesn't have a ton of ice time, but his high danger chances, the Oilers, when Stetcher's on the ice, create 52% of the high danger chances, meaning that when he's out there, they are getting the puck to more dangerous areas of the ice. The expected goals is like 49.8. So when Stetcher's on the ice, that means the Canucks are giving up the Canucks. I did it again. In my brain, I'll always think of Troy Stecher as a Canuck, but on the Oilers in 2024-2025, when Stetcher is out there, that means the Oilers are conceding scoring chances against, but not from as dangerous of areas. You know, a high danger scoring chance is defined if you close your eyes and you picture what a rink looks like. if you go from the face-off dots and you draw the diagonal lines down to the post, and then you connect the face-off dots with a line, that trapezoid, within that space is high danger because those are chances that are most likely to result in a goal. You know, we talk about the cross-seam pass from one side to the other where you get the goalie moving left to right. Those are particularly dangerous. You know, the doorstep shots, the jam plays, the stuff in and around the net mouth that'll produce a rugby scrum. Those are high danger chances. So when Stetcher's out there, they're at least, the Oilers are keeping the other team to the outside. And it's not ideal to face a higher volume of chances than you can create. But if you are conceding low quality chances and you're on the ice while the offense is helping create more, you can become tolerant of that. You can accept that trade-off. You know, everything in hockey strategy wise has a trade-off. You know, if you want to cycle, that means you have to work harder for your offense. You got to win foot races. You got to string together 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 passes in a row before you get a scoring chance. If you're a rush-based offense, if teams take away the cross-seam pass, you have to be able to transition to a cycle and be able to prolong your offensive zone time to be able to work down the other team so that they start to make mistakes. So you'll have the opportunity to create off the rush. And for Stetcher, in an ideal world, Troy Stecher is probably your 6th defenseman if you're a good team. You know, and in an ideal world, Stetcher's your 7th defenseman. There's a reason at his age he doesn't have a rock solid track record. You know, at 30 years old, he has 517 career games played. This is not somebody who has been a slam dunk surefire NHLer, but his path tells you that there's something here that once teams get him in their door, they like, because he hangs around. You know, the Oilers after this past season could have said, well, Troy, you got hurt over the course of the playoffs, so we couldn't call on you when we could have used you. We think we're going to keep Broberg instead. You know, maybe we do something else. And instead, the Oilers saw the chance to buy a depreciated asset, you know, coming off an injury, making less than $800,000 a year as a veteran. That is an opportunity for the Oilers to extract excess value on a contract. And it's hard to do that in the NHL because of the way salaries and contracts work in this league. It's really hard to get guys under their market value because guys get paid so infrequently. And when I say get paid, I mean the big number. I mean, most guys only get one big contract in their respective careers. You know, Austin Matthews, he's somebody who's prioritized shorter term contracts to be able to capitalize more. But for someone like Stetcher, these 1 and 2 year deals for 10 years to keep around in the league, that tells me at the very least, teams see something here that we can work with, that they can work with. And the Oilers, to their credit, didn't go out there and force something. And look, yeah, you could say they might have forced Josh Brown, that they didn't really necessarily need to keep Dermott on the PTO and give him a full-time contract. But they had the idea that they were going to, for lack of a better word, they were going to win by attrition. That of that crop of guys, at least 2 were going to be good enough to stick and be good enough to hold it down for the first few months. The Oilers defensively aren't as glaringly bad as they were the first few weeks to month or so of the season because they've had less to do. And when you only need to just help, you don't need to carry the load, it becomes a lot easier. You know, for so much of the first month of the season, I kept saying, don't tell me about the defense. The offense needs to score. And now you are seeing that. And I'm not saying Stetcher is doing a tremendous job, but he's doing a good enough job. And this early in the season, this is the type of good luck you need when it comes to player performance. We're going to take one more quick break on today's show. We're going to dive into whether or not Stetcher is going to stick around post-trade deadline in terms of his roster spot, if he's going to get bumped out, a whole lot more. So be sure to stick around. Get ready to tackle NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. A couple really good games in the NFL this week. Rams 49ers on Thursday night is a good appetizer. 49ers and Rams both fighting for their playoff lives. Later in the week, Sunday, we've got 2 pretty solid games. You got the Battle of Pennsylvania. You got the Steelers heading to Philadelphia to take on the Eagles, where the Eagles are 5.5-point favorites. And then same time, Josh Allen and the Bills coming off that barn burner against the Rams, heading to Detroit to take on the Super Bowl favorite Detroit Lions, where the Lions are 1.5-point favorites. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. It's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out here on this Tuesday edition of Locked On Oilers as we are talking all about Troy Stecher's first full season as an Edmonton. And when you hit on one of your dart throws, and I would categorize a dart throw as somebody you didn't have a ton of expectations for. I don't think anybody realistically expected Troy Stecher to be some godsend, some magic fix, especially coming off of an injury based on the potential partners for him to play with. But to his credit, he's been more than functional. And I think his skill set, because he's offensively inclined in terms of being a good skater and having decent puck skills, I think that type of skill set is a bit more sticky and transferable team to team than, say, someone who's a bit more defense oriented, because somebody who's strong defensively might not necessarily be as effective at defense at another stop. This is one of my favorite things to talk about in all of sports. I love trying to get to the root of what makes someone successful as a player, as a coach, because there's degrees of success and certain parts of that success aren't necessarily transferable. I often talk about teams trying to import credibility from other places. It's why teams always loot champions. It's why they always loot teams that consistently win, because they don't want to do the legwork of building their own credibility. They don't want to do the legwork of developing their own talent. So what do? They poach guys from other organizations, from other teams, to try and fill in the gaps, to take a shortcut, if you will, to playing better. And Stetcher is somebody on the other end of that spectrum. They took a chance on him when they acquired him. They took a chance on bringing him back in free agency, and he's done more than enough to justify keeping him in the lineup till the trade deadline. And then you can have an honest conversation, and that's a good thing to have. If you are good enough where somebody who's played top 4 minutes at various points in your season in terms of who he plays with and responsibilities, that tells me that if he's a real candidate to come out of the lineup, you have a pretty good defensive group. And I'm not going to say it's Stetcher alone. Kulak has definitely helped out Darnell Nurse in the impacts over the last few weeks. The Oilers have been better defensively. The transition stuff has been a little more easy to come by. They're able to break out a little more cleanly. They're not as reliant just on organized breakouts. It's really kind of a gradual improvement. And that's really been my biggest theme so far over the course of the first 3 months, 2.5 months of the NHL season. The Oilers are making progress. They're on a nice run right now, 9-3-1 in their last 13. They have a chance against some of these really quality teams. That run against good teams starts tonight against Tampa Bay. But if you can get Stetcher to be a good facsimile for top 4 play, and look, I understand that the numbers aren't incredible. I understand that he's playing 14-something minutes a night. I understand he's playing the chunk of his minutes against other teams' worst players. But if you can get by with effectively close to nothing happening while someone like this is on the ice, that's a win for you if you're the Oilers. Because if you have control of the game and your best players are playing like they're supposed to, and your depth guys are at worst nothing, if best case an addition, it's the opposite kind of where they've been at various points earlier in this year, where it felt like the big guns weren't really going so hot. So that put a lot more weight on the depth than the secondary players. And those players obviously aren't good enough to carry the load that Hyman, Nuge, Arvidsson, and Skinner underperforming had met. Now, you kind of got the foundation going. I talked about it on yesterday's episode of the show. If you were to lay out a pyramid of like the keys to success, the baseline is dominating the McDavid minutes. Then it's about winning the special teams battle. Then it's about defense. Then it's about goaltending. And then at the very top, it's the depth. It's Connor Brown, it's Janmark, it's Perry, it's Derek Ryan. If those guys all the way at the top are chipping in too, and everything else is lined up, the Oilers are a terrifying prospect to face. And they're going to improve the roster. They're going to add guys to this lineup. And all of that in conjunction, it gives you the potential to be great. It gives you the potential to be a Stanley Cup caliber team. Now, I don't know how steady that foundation is. There's definitely some work to do as far as consistency night over night, but the fact that you got Draisaitl playing really good defense, the fact that you have got out of that Murphy's Law funk that so much of this team was mired in for the first month of the season, where every close puck ended up going the other way. It ended up in the back of your net, and it felt like you couldn't buy a save at various points. All of that said, if we are sitting here on March 5th, which is the NHL trade deadline, and Troy Stecher is in the Oilers' sixth defenseman, he's not bumped out of the lineup, or he's an injury replacement for someone else, I don't know how I would necessarily feel going into the postseason. I think you probably need a player better than him, frankly, if you're going to go on a deep playoff run, partly because you're going to have injuries. Every team suffers injuries over the course of a playoff. Most NHL teams, if they get to a cup final, they're going to have to play 8 or 9 defensemen because guys are going to get dinged up because those games accumulate so fast. So if they aren't able to add another top 4 caliber guy and they roll into the playoffs with Stetcher as one of their 6, that would probably give me a little bit of pause. For the regular season, he's fine. This is a solid replacement level player who has a little bit of upside, who isn't getting you killed right now. Of course, that could change. We could revisit this subject a month from now, and he could have a brutal December into January, and maybe the Oilers need to speed up their process, or they consider something they hadn't. Maybe Dermott gets another look. But for now, Stetcher giving them more than they expected is a really welcome reprieve. You marry that to the bounce backs you're going to start getting from Hyman, from Nugent-Hopkins, from Arvidsson, and you add that whenever Arvidsson does come back, and you add all of that to your foundation of McDavid, of the special teams, you have a really potent team. That'll do it for today's edition of Locked On Oilers. If you could be so kind, please subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. If you happen to be listening on Apple or Spotify, please give the show a 5-star review. If you're watching over on YouTube, hit the subscribe button, hit the alarm bell, get a notification whenever new content goes live. I will talk to you guys tomorrow after the Tampa Bay game.